All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Joelle Marier. I am the Executive Director of the National Wilderness Stewardship Alliance, and I'm happy to be here sharing some information about our Wilderness Stewardship Performance Grant Program with you all, and specifically about our program for 2025. Just so you all know how the hour or so that we're together is going to go. I'll spend the first probably 40 or 45 minutes just walking through both the general program and some of the specifics for this year. And then if folks want to tune up, if you want to sign off after that, there'll be, maybe like 10 minutes for questions. And then after that question break, if anybody on the call is interested in learning more about the specific scoring process for wilderness stewardship performance, I'll spend a little time afterwards talking about that. So if you already know about that, you can sign off after we're done with the first round of questions. But if you want to learn more about what we're looking for as far as WSP scoring, stay on a little longer. All right, well, let's jump in. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the program, NWSA has been running this program since 2016, and it was formed through a partnership with the USDA Forest Service in an effort to really help the agency engage partners in achieving their wilderness stewardship performance goals. So in 2016, the Wilderness Stewardship Performance Grant Program was born, and this program directs federal funding to local organizations that are doing on the ground work in support of national forest wilderness areas. And now we're about 8 years into the program. I think this will be our 9th year offering this funding. And this program really has become a primary way that the agency is achieving their wilderness stewardship performance goals. So why engage partners? Why not have the agency doing this on their own? Well, I think most of us are from partner organizations, so we can appreciate why partners are so important. But I think there's, beyond the capacity that partners bring with their own staff, volunteers, and oftentimes other funding sources that they're contributing to wilderness stewardship. Um, I think partners can really also keep driving that ball forward when you've got partners on the ground who are excited to work on wilderness stewardship performance or wilderness stewardship in general. It gives the agency incentive to get things done, and it also gives them the capacity to get those things done. But I think the other thing that partners do that's so great is really bringing those volunteers in and engaging the public in wilderness stewardship. And that is so important because it gives the public knowledge about what types of activities are happening on the ground, both from the partner perspective, but also from the agency perspective. And it also helps them learn about wilderness stewardship, helps them become better wilderness stewards, and gives them buy-in in public lands. So really, these programs put the public in public lands. And then finally, I think, as we see a lot of agencies struggling to keep staff on board right now, I think most of you know the Forest Service is experiencing a hiring freeze, especially for those temporary seasonal employees that many of you might be working with seasonally. Our on the ground partners and local partners can really be a consistent presence for wilderness stewardship. And as agencies struggle to hire people because of housing difficulties, budgets, etc., that consistent presence becomes more and more important year to year, as does this capacity. So I just wanted to share some of our program accomplishments to get everybody psyched up before we talk about the details for this year. Since 2016, we have distributed over $2.4 million in grant funding to 177 individual organizations. Those organizations collectively have completed over 200 projects on 170 wilderness areas. And just to put that into perspective, 170 wilderness areas is almost 40% of all Forest Service wilderness areas, and it's 21% of the entire wilderness preservation system. So I think those are some pretty great accomplishments just 8 years into the program. But I also think there's a lot more to do. Then as far as like what our partners are bringing, partners and grantees have contributed over $6 million in-kind and cash contributions to these efforts to match that 2.4 million. And those contributions have leveraged federal funding at a 3-to-1 ratio. So what that means is for every $1 that the agency has spent on wilderness stewardship, they've gotten back at least $3 worth of work, if not more. That's pretty awesome. And a big part of that funding leverage has been volunteers. Over 7,000 volunteers have been engaged in wilderness stewardship through this program, and they've contributed over 150,000 hours. And all of that work has resulted in an extra 1,400 WSP points that the agency has either gained or maintained over the past 8 years. So if you're on this call and you've been a recipient of WSP funding, thank you for contributing to these great accomplishments. So a quick program overview. This program is specifically for 501c3 organizations or federally recognized tribes. The work has to be completed on designated Forest Service wilderness areas, and all projects need to contribute to Forest Service wilderness stewardship performance scores. So if some of this stuff, especially the scoring piece, is unfamiliar to you, we'll get into where you can find more information here in a second. To be eligible for this program, again, you need to be a 501c3 nonprofit organization in good standing or a federally recognized tribe. We also require that applicants for this program have a current membership with NWSA. So if you're not already a member and you're thinking about applying for this funding, you can find more information about membership on our website. Again, the project needs to occur in a federally designated wilderness area on national forest lands. And it also needs to contribute to Forest Service wilderness stewardship performance scoring. So what that means is you'll have to be working with your agency partner to find out what projects will qualify. Um, in order for us to make sure that there is agency buy-in, we require a letter or letters of support from your Forest Service contacts. So if you're working locally on one wilderness area, you're probably just going to need one letter. If you have a much larger project that's spanning multiple forests or maybe multiple wilderness areas, you may need more than one letter. And then finally, a 20% match is required for these for this funding. And then I did want to note that tribes may be eligible for a waiver for our NWSA membership. So if you are a member of a federally recognized tribe and you're interested in this opportunity, please contact me individually so we can get you set up to complete the application. All right, funding details for 2025. We have a little bit less funding available than normal. So this year we've got $125,000 available to re-grant. If you've been participating in wilderness stewardship performance in the past, you'll notice that our maximum award has decreased from 30,000 to 20,000, and this is directly related to the smaller amount of funding that we have available. The minimum is still the same, $2,000 minimum. And then again, there's that 20% match requirement for any grant funding. And something I should have mentioned while I was back on that slide, but I didn't. In case you haven't grasped this already, this is 100% federal funding. So if you're thinking about using this program as match for another grant, you cannot use this funding as match for other federal funding, and conversely, you cannot use other federal funding as match for this program. So what's covered with this grant funding? One thing to note is these are reimbursable grants, so you'll have to outlay the work and outlay the expenses before you receive the grant funding. If you are awarded, you will not receive a whole lump sum of funding that you can then spend throughout the year. The things that we pay for with this grant are listed here. But just note that all of the things on this list need to be tied to your project. We don't cover just general salaries and benefits. They have to be salaries and benefits for key program and project staff that are helping to get your project completed. So salaries and benefits are one line item. Travel and transportation, these could be things like per diem, mileage, lodging if you need to stay somewhere to complete the work, meals if you're on the road traveling to a location, etc. Equipment and supplies. So the way I differentiate between these two things is I assume equipment is something that you're going to use for a long time, something you're going to buy and you'll use it year to year. So that could be a GPS unit, it could be backpacks, it could be some safety equipment, something like that that has a lifespan, a little bit longer lifespan. And then supplies and materials tend to be things that are more expendable, like you're probably going to go through them within a season. And these would be things like food, toiletries, volunteer appreciation items, whatever you're providing for your staff and volunteers that probably not going to have around next year to reuse again. You can also use this funding to hire contractors. These are just some examples. There's definitely other ways you could engage a contractor in this work. But PAC support, data management, mapping, those are really common ways to engage contractors in this work. There's also a category called other costs. Most of your costs should fit into the categories listed here, but every once in a while there's a cost that doesn't, and that could be something like stipends for interns or something like that. So we keep that category in there just in case there's it doesn't fit into these other ones. And then finally, indirect costs. We allow all grantees to include 10% default indirect costs into their grant proposal or into their grant budget, unless you have a federal negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, in which case you are welcome to use that percentage. We'll just need to have a copy of that agreement on hand. And then I think before I leave this slide, I'll just talk a little bit about what we cannot fund. It's really a top three. We cannot fund any advocacy work like lobbying or trying to pass legislation. We don't fund any equipment purchases for equipment that's value is $5,000 or more. So that even if you only asked for a portion of that funding from the grant, but it's going towards a large equipment purchase, we can't fund that kind of thing. So that would be something like a vehicle or an ATV or something like that. Probably isn't the best fit, but you could use those for match. And then finally, we can't fund fundraising activities for your general organization. All right, timeline for the 2025 program. The application period will open on October 18th. And if you haven't seen this already in some of our materials, our whole wilderness stewardship performance application will be moved online. I'm in the process of doing that now. So October 18th, it will open up on that platform. And then the deadline is December 5th. Something that's different now that we've moved everything online is these dates are pretty set in stone. You won't be able to access the application or submit anything until October 18th. And on December 5th, at the end of that day, when the application period closes, you won't be able to send or upload any more documents. So just keep those dates in mind so that you have all the documents you need in by the deadline. We plan to announce awards in January of 2025. Last year, we were on a similar timeline and we were able to announce awards by the end of the month. And I hope we'll be able to do something similar this year. Grantees will have about a year to spend the funds, and the deadline for project completion will be December 31st, 2025. If you have a project that's much longer than that, I would really recommend applying for just one phase of that project and explaining to us how that phase fits into the larger project and your overall accomplishments. And we really are trying to stick with this 1 year deadline so that we can, make sure that as much of this funding as possible goes on the ground. The more work that we have to do on the admin end, the less money there is available for wilderness stewardship projects. So that's why we're keeping it at a year this year and hopefully extending it to, 11 or 12 months is really going to help you guys get that done. It's also not huge amounts of funding, so hopefully folks will be able to get their projects complete in that time frame. And then finally, at the end of the grant period, a couple weeks later, we'll ask for a final report and any final invoices that you have. And that will happen in mid-January of 2026. All right, so we've gotten this far. If you're still hanging in there and you're not that familiar with wilderness stewardship performance, I'm just going to give a quick overview of it now. You might also hear people calling this WSP, that's the Forest Service acronym, and kind of the industry acronym for this work. So wilderness stewardship performance is a Forest Service protocol that they use to measure wilderness stewardship accomplishments for each wilderness. And this is really different from, well, it's related to wilderness character monitoring, and they work together, but it's not the same. So if you're familiar with wilderness character monitoring, I would say the difference is wilderness stewardship performance is measuring the actual actions, like what is the agency doing to improve wilderness stewardship or support wilderness stewardship. And wilderness character monitoring measures the impacts of those actions on the ground. So wilderness stewardship performance is the actions and the agency, and the wilderness character monitoring is really about the land in the wilderness and the impacts of those actions. Something that's important, essential for you to know about wilderness stewardship performance is that each wilderness area has 10 elements selected for it. And that's where any wilderness stewardship work that you're doing, at least for this program, will be happening. And we'll talk more about those elements in a second. But I do just want to stress that if you're doing work under this grant, you need to be doing work within the chosen elements for that wilderness. So you're going to have to be working with your Forest Service staff to find out what those are. And then here is the Bible for the work that we'll be doing. If you haven't seen this before, I would recommend checking it out. This will be really directing the type of work you do and the products that you end up with. There's a link here on the bottom, and when I share the slides after this presentation, you'll be able to access this if you don't already have access. This is the 2020 version of the Wilderness Stewardship Performance Guidebook. I think there's a new version in process, but it hasn't been released yet. So at least for now, we're working under this version. And as I go through this presentation, you'll be seeing little screenshots of the rubrics that will really be guiding a lot of this work. Okay, the 10 elements. So for those of you who are familiar with wilderness character, you can see the qualities of wilderness character on the left under the category column: natural, undeveloped, untrammeled, solitude, other features of value. And then the elements, which is really where the work for this program happens, are in the middle. And there's a pretty long list there. So the work that you're doing can fit within any one of those elements as long as that element is chosen for that wilderness area. Some of these elements are mandatory for every wilderness, so so you'll know that those are places you can do work. Other elements are not mandatory, they're electives. So you'll have to, if you're working in those elements, you'll have to make sure they've been chosen for that area. Again, I'm just going to put this slide here. Forest Service coordination is essential for this program. And if you haven't been talking with your Forest Service personnel about a project for WSP yet, do it tomorrow. Engage early. These, getting the letters of support that you need and getting all of the information you need to complete the application will definitely require a Forest Service contact to access their databases, let you know which elements are applied to that wilderness, let you know how many points they already have, and talk about ways that you can engage to help the agency maintain their points or increase their points. And that, just understanding those agency needs, but also the protocols that they have in place is really important. Certainly wouldn't want to be out there collecting data and then find out at the end of the season that the agency can't use the data or there's something really important missing in the data. So engage early with your Forest Service contacts. Um, and really work together on project planning. Especially if you have a really strong contact, that should be easy and fun, I would hope. But that just ensures that the project really meets the needs of everybody involved. And then finally, find a reliable contact and also a backup. This hiring freeze especially is going to be a challenge for folks trying to complete field work next year. And the person that you normally work with might not be around. Or maybe they go on a fire, maybe they go on a detail, and you need some information, they're not around. So find that reliable contact, but also make sure you have a backup so that if they're not around, you have a way to get the information or the help that you need. All right, I'm just going to go, this next piece is just going real quick through each of the elements that I see most commonly done for the Wilderness Stewardship Performance Program. I'm not going to get too in depth on any of them just because of time constraints, but I just wanted to give you guys all an idea of what's out there. If you're familiar with the Wilderness Stewardship Performance Guidebook, these go in order with the guidebook. They're not in order by most popular or most important. They're just following along with the guidebook. So recreation sites, this is a really great way for partners to engage. I'm sure a lot of you are already doing some of this work, recreation site inventories. I just have a short list here of ways you could engage. Um, Assisting with a site monitoring plan, that's maybe a little bit heavier of a lift, or helping the agency implement actions that are identified by the plan. And here's the rubric that you would see in the Wilderness Stewardship Performance Guidebook. And as you can see, there's a whole list of things and ways that you could engage on this over time. Invasive species, this one's a really great way for partners to engage. You can help with general invasive species inventory, help out with treatment, and then if there's management or treatments done, help out with that ongoing monitoring. If you're really going above and beyond, you could maybe even help the agency develop a treatment plan for invasive species in your wilderness. And here's the rubric for that one from the WSP guidebook. Trails. So I'm going to spend a little more time on this one. If you're an organization looking at this program for general trail maintenance funding, I would really encourage you to look instead at NWSA's Trail Partners Grant Program. That program funds trail maintenance on National Forest System trails and is really where we fund those types of projects. This particular program, although trails could qualify, is one of the only ways that we're funding partners to do wilderness stewardship performance work on national forests. So we really try to spread it out to all of these other wilderness stewardship activities that need to happen. With that said, a really special trail project might make the cut, but again, I would really recommend that you look at our Trail Partners program. With that said, we do fund user-developed trails or social trails projects with this funding. So that would be things like a social trails inventory or a user-developed trails inventory, whatever you want to call it. And then also, if there's a plan created from that inventory, helping the agency implement those management actions, whether that's closing trails, rehabilitating sites, etc. And there's the rubric for that one. Non-compliant infrastructure. So you can see these guys here in this picture did an awesome job of removing some barbed wire fence. Some ways you can engage in this particular category are taking an inventory of all infrastructure in the wilderness. So this would include everything, signs, fences, trailhead markers, wilderness boundary signs, whatever it is, and then working with the agency to identify which of those things are really not compliant and not supporting wilderness character. And then once you have that list, you could help the agency to remove fence, remove a building, replace a bridge with a water crossing, whatever they deem most important for getting that wilderness and back in, helping that wilderness and improving wilderness character. And here's the rubric for that one. I don't expect you guys to read these, by the way, they're just here for example, but they'll also be in the slideshow after the fact. Opportunities for solitude. This one is an awesome way to engage volunteers. And what I like about it is it doesn't really require people to do a lot of heavy physical work. If folks like hiking, or even if they just like sitting around out in the wilderness, this is such an awesome thing for them to do. So the only thing about solitude monitoring is for the activities to count, for the most part, they need to happen with a solitude monitoring plan in place. However, that's something that I have seen organizations help the agency with or even do. And if you're already out there collecting visitor use data, that data can be a really valuable addition to these solitude monitoring plans. And so here's the rubric for that one. Partner activities, or workforce capacity. So this one's pretty low hanging. If you're helping the agency get work done in the wilderness, you're contributing to workforce capacity. Depending on how long you've been doing that and how the agency's been reporting it, you might gain 2 points, or you might just help them maintain those points. But if you're helping them out, you're most likely contributing to this element. Education. This is also a really great one, and we've been seeing more and more organizations doing these types of projects recently. Um, the slate of things you can do related to education is pretty large, and it really depends on where the agency is at in their education element. So if they haven't created an education plan, you could be doing any kind of wilderness education activities and help them gain or maintain points. You can also help the agency create a wilderness education plan. We've definitely funded proposals to that end. Um, you can engage non-traditional audiences or youth. That's actually a checkbox. You could do that at any time and still help the agency improve their score. And then once an education plan is in place, you can help the agency implement the activities that they identify in the wilderness education plan as priority activities. And here is the rubric for that one. And then wilderness character baseline. This one's probably the most complicated of all. If you haven't worked with the agency on WSP yet, I'm not sure this would be the best place to start, but again, it depends on your relationship there. But wilderness character baselines really do require someone to be pretty dedicated to completing this, especially if you're going to complete it within the grant period. And it requires quite a lot of coordination with your local Forest Service staff to get the data you need, help decide on measures, um, and eventually compile that wilderness character baseline. But one thing that partners can really be a big help with is once the baseline is established, helping to monitor those trends over time. So a lot of the elements of wilderness character in the baseline assessment have intervals like 1 year or 5 years when you need to update that data to determine what the trend is. So here's the rubric there. And I'm not trying to discourage anyone, but I just want you guys to know it's a little heavier lift than maybe some of those other ones. And this one is also pretty difficult to involve volunteers in. So if you are looking at doing a wilderness character baseline, you might want to think about other ways to engage those volunteers. Maybe there's another WSP element that you can be working on the side. Or maybe there's a really creative way that you can engage them with the baseline. And then finally, less common. I just put this list up here so that you'd be aware. I have seen projects come in and points gained for all these elements, but they're just not quite as common as some of the other ones. I'm not going to run through the list. You can see them here. But don't let this list dissuade you from working on them if you have important work that needs to happen for WSP. But just if you're totally new to the program, these are some things we don't see quite as often. All right, rating criteria. Um, so in general, our ratings are based on these 4 criteria and a mixture of, I think they're ranked about evenly in the scoring process. How much are you getting done? What's the accomplishment and what's the impact on wilderness stewardship performance? How well are you leveraging federal funding? So this is a mix of whatever matching contributions you're bringing to the table, but also volunteers that you're engaging. And those things do overlap, but I have volunteers separate because volunteer engagement is a big reason why the agency entrusts NWSA to distribute this funding so that we're bringing the public to public lands and getting volunteers out there helping with wilderness stewardship so they ultimately become better wilderness stewards. How well is the project planned, and do you have Forest Service support? So we're looking at things like your project planning, your project design. If you have a challenge, are you being innovative about solving it? Maybe there's an innovation that's really interesting and could really change how a lot of organizations are doing wilderness stewardship. And then finally, incorporation of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in your project. Um, I know folks sometimes have a hard time understanding what they need to do for this particular element or for this particular criteria. And I think I would say it's really important to keep working on this because we're going to keep this is going to continue to be a criteria for all of our grant programs. And a big reason why we do that is, as wilderness stewards and leaders in the wilderness stewardship community, and that includes all of you on this call, we really have a responsibility to uphold uphold public lands, make sure that public lands truly are inclusive, accessible, welcoming, and safe for everyone, the entire public, not just certain sections of the public. So for DEIA, that could include lots of different things. It could include bilingual materials that you're creating for your wilderness. It could include special projects that engage people from your community that are underserved or don't normally get engaged with your organization. It could include building those relationships. Maybe you don't have them yet, but you really want to improve your outreach and improve inclusivity in your wilderness, and you're just at the beginning stages. That type of thing qualifies as well. And then after we rank all of the projects according to these criteria, we take a look at where projects are falling geographically, and we really do try hard to make sure that if we've got applications coming in from different regions, that at least a little bit of funding goes to each region. Not always possible, but we try to do our best to also spread the funding across a geographic scope. So on that note, if you're working in an area where you suspect or you know that a lot of other organizations are also doing wilderness stewardship performance and maybe applying for this funding, you might consider working together. Reach out to them, find out, are you applying for the program this year? What type of work are you doing? Are there ways we can work together to make a better proposal or bring more volunteers to the table? Um, that's a great strategy, and we love to see people collaborating and working together. Tips for success. This is a short list. There are many more. And if you've gone to our website, there is an RFP from last year, and it has like at least 1 or more pages full of tips for success. I don't think those will change in the updated materials. So take a look at that, and I'll be updating it here in the next couple of weeks as well. But real quick, early coordination, again, with your Forest Service staff. Talk to them tomorrow. Make sure you can get those letters of support signed and submitted by the deadline of December 5th. Make sure you're choosing projects that contribute to improvement of wilderness stewardship performance scores. So again, you've got to do work that falls within the elements for that wilderness. Be honest about your WSP scoring and your contribution to the outcome. Our review team has been doing this a while. When we see applications that look like maybe the applicant didn't really understand the process, or maybe those points aren't really being achieved by this project, but they've been achieved earlier, we can tell. So, just be honest about the WSP scoring. If you're not familiar or you're still confused by WSP scoring, stay on this webinar and I'll be talking about that at the end. Or if you can't stay on, it'll be part of the recording as well. Having a solid plan is really important. So if you don't have a solid plan, this is the time to start working on that. And the solid plan spans completing the project, engaging those volunteers, and any DEIA elements that you want to incorporate. We want to see projects that are well planned and well thought out. Maybe you don't know exactly who you're going to engage for volunteers, but we want to know that you have a plan for getting them out on the ground. And same with the project and any DEIA elements. Really work hard to engage volunteers and underserved communities. It's not, we understand that sometimes it's not possible to be knocking it out of the park on the first year, but we really want to see that you're giving it a shot. Make sure you have those matching contributions in place. If you have cash match, for example, but it's not for sure. Let's say you've got a grant application out there, you're really hoping that can be matched for this project, but it's not going to come in until maybe next spring. Make sure you have a backup, some in-kind plan, like maybe you've got an extra volunteer project in the wings to make up that cash match if it doesn't come through. Again, breaking your multi-year projects into phases that can be completed by the grant deadline is a really great strategy if you have a much larger project. Just make sure to tell us how the phase you're completing fits into the overall project and the end result. And then if you've been doing this for a while and you've received WSP funding before, or if WSP is something new, try something new. Expand the WSP activities you help support. That really helps build your skill set. It helps improve your relationship with the agency, and it just makes you that much more valuable of a partner. And then finally, how to apply. All of our application has moved online. So this is the link to our submittable account, and I'm going to switch to another page. It's pretty bright, so get ready. This is what you'll see when you click on that link. Right now, we don't have any applications open, so there's nowhere to access the application. But on October 18th, you will suddenly see a little window down here at the bottom of the screen with the title of the grant program and a button that says apply or submit. And that's how you'll get into the program. If you don't have a submittable account already, you'll have to set that up, and then you should be able to access the screening part of the application, which will make sure that you meet the eligibility requirements. And then after that, you'll be directed to the application itself. And then finally, when you submit your application, there are some documents you'll need to have in place. We need to know that you're an NWSA member, so a receipt from your membership renewal, which should have come to you via email when you renewed your membership. And also you'll need to know the date that that renewal was made, and I'll also be double checking that on my end. You'll need your signed Forest Service letters of support. As with previous years, a complete budget form. I don't think the budget form will change a whole lot, and that includes your grant request, any cash match that you're bringing, any in-kind match that you're bringing, and then if you have federal match, we like to know what it is, but that doesn't count towards your total match. But all of those numbers help give us an idea of how much did the project really cost and how much did we invest with WSP funding. You'll also need a complete WSP scoring form. This is a little different from previous years because I think we've just had trouble getting the exact numbers to the agency, and I think by putting the WSP scoring on a separate spreadsheet might make it easier for applicants to calculate that scores, and it definitely makes it easier for us to compile all that data at the end. at the end of the period. Okay, and finally, just some resources here. Again, the Wilderness Stewardship Performance Guidebook is available through this link and on another link in the slides. Definitely visit our website and learn about the Wilderness Stewardship Performance Program. As I mentioned, there are resources from last year's grant application process on the website now. I don't imagine that the questions are going to change too much, so that's a good place to start for now. But I will be replacing those with the updated materials as they become available. Sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. It's a really great way to know when changes happen, like maybe we extend the grant deadline, maybe we open a second application round. It's just a really good way to stay up to date. It's also a great way to stay up to date if a new Wilderness Stewardship Performance Guidebook comes out or other important releases from the agency. If you aren't a member, become a member or renew your membership. And then in general, just visit our website and see if there might be some other resources there that your organization can benefit from. All right, so I'm going to open it up for a question break. And after this, if folks already know about WSP scoring, you're welcome to bounce and go do the rest of your day. But if you are curious about WSP scoring, I'll spend 5 or 10 minutes talking about that after this question break. My email address is here. If you have any questions that you would like to talk with me personally about or a project idea you want to run by me, please feel free to reach out at this contact information. So I guess Kim, I can actually see the chat, so I'm happy to just manage that.
Yeah, there's some going back earlier.
Okay, great. You're welcome to take yourself off mute. Just make sure to raise your hand and I'll call on folks so that we make sure to get to everybody. I should be able to see your hand raised here. But I'm going to start in the chat, and then if you think of a question and you want to ask it out loud to the group, you're more than welcome to. So first question is go into more detail about indirect costs and what those cover. Indirect costs are basically, it doesn't actually cover any, it's supposed to be things like your overhead. So your office space, your computer equipment, etc. Things that you need to just run your day-to-day organization. So those would be indirects, but we don't require, for all of the other line items, we do require, pretty clear supporting documentation. But for indirect costs, you don't need any documentation. That's just 10% on the top of whatever your direct costs are. So does that answer your question, Kim?
Yeah. Can you clarify if that would be administrative salaries, like executive director salary, a portion of that?
Well, it doesn't, I mean, because it's just an indirect, you can apply it to whatever you want to.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Okay, next question. Are you hearing from any Forest Service districts needing more help in future monitoring, given the recent 1039 hiring freeze? Not yet. I haven't heard anything. If there's any Forest Service folks on this call, feel free to raise your hand and chime in, since you would definitely know more about that than I do. There have been folks speculating that that will be the case. But again, especially for wilderness stewardship performance, you do really need to have somebody in the office to help you access the data, etc. So that's a key element. All right. Will the Trail Stewardship Partner Funding Program be available to apply for this fall as well? Great question. I had been trying to open an application round this fall, but it really required us to get some extra funding. And as you know, there's not a whole lot of extra funding to go around right now in the Forest Service. So No, we're not going to, as far as I know at this moment in time, open another application round for trail partners this fall. We're still working to shift the timing to a fall application round, um, early winter award announcements, but we're not quite there yet. And I'm not sure if we are going to do that next year, or I'm just not sure how that's going to go down yet because it really depends on funding amounts. But sign up for our newsletter and you will stay updated with the latest. Um, okay. Anything else? I think I've gotten through the questions in the chat. If most of these other things I'm seeing are comments, but if I missed anything, let me know. And if you've got a question you want to share out loud with the group, just raise your hand and we'll call on you. Joe, go for it.
Hi, Joelle. Sorry I was late joining. Hello,
That's okay.
everyone. I'm with the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness Foundation, and Lauren's with us is on here too. I don't think wild and scenic river monitoring is part of this grant. Um, do you have opportunities for wild and scenic monitoring? Because that is a need on our forest that they
You
didn't get
know,
to.
I think River Management Society has a grant program tied to wild and scenic river monitoring, so you might check that out.
Okay, thanks.
Hmm.
So can you say the name again?
River
Wow.
Management Society.
Thank you.
Anyone else have questions before we jump into the scoring portion?
I have one more.
Okay, go ahead.
Is there any restrictions if you're currently operating under a grant from last year?
Oh,
We can
that's a
apply.
great question. No, there's no restrictions. If you've got an open grant and you're still working on closing that out by the end of this year, you're still welcome to apply, and that doesn't count against you in any way. Great question.
Thanks.
Yep. All right, I'm going to spend a little bit of time running through these next few slides, and then we'll have one more opportunity for questions and wrap it up. Okay, so WSP scoring. For those of you who haven't looked at the Wilderness Stewardship Performance Guidebook yet, these are the rubrics that you're going to be working from when you're doing WSP. There's other information in there for each element. So just make sure that you're reading through all of that clearly. And I would really recommend reading through the whole thing from the beginning so you understand the process and what these scores do and how you might engage. But essentially, when you see this rubric, the items on the top are scored incrementally. So step one has to happen first, and you need to complete step one in order to get points and be ready to do step two. So in this case, we're just using solitude monitoring as the example. And in step one, you are completing a solitude monitoring plan for the wilderness, and also developing that monitoring protocol so that you're set up to do step two, which is completing a baseline inventory using that protocol. Um, Once you've got the inventory done, you can use that data to identify management actions the agency might take. That's probably more of an internal process, but partners could be involved. And then once you've got those identified, you can do step three and implement some of the actions that have been recommended by that plan. So if we go back on these points, at each step along the way, I think this part does get confusing for folks. After you complete the solitude monitoring and you produce these deliverables over here, or these outcomes, the agency gets 2 points. You don't really get 2 points. But there's 2 points scored pretty much for that wilderness and for the Forest Service. Then when you complete the next step, you don't you're not adding 4 points, you're gaining 2 points. So this is the total amount of points that the agency can report for wilderness stewardship performance if they've gotten this far along the path. So if you're submitting your application, let's say they've already got a solitude monitoring plan in place, and now you're helping to implement the plan, and you think you're going to be able to get that done by the end of the program, by the end of the grant period, you gain 2 points for the agency, but their score will increase to 4 points. Hopefully that makes sense, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And similarly here, if you're going from baseline monitoring to actually implementing actions, you're still only gaining 2 points, but the total score for solitude for the wilderness is 6 points. And then most of the rubrics also have these check boxes at the bottom. These are kind of like bonus points. They're not tied to the categories above most of the time, so they can be completed without a lot of the steps in place in general. So that could be a way if the agency hasn't, if you or the agency hasn't completed some of the steps above, you might already be doing work down in some of these check boxes. But the things below on the second tier they're not incremental, they're just check boxes. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, this is something else that I often see applicants struggling with, which is the WSP scoring, both for their initial application and then reporting purposes. So on the left, I've got the project, you, and on the right, I've got what the Forest Service is reporting for their total points. And year to year, I've been trying to set this up so it's more obvious, and I'll try again this year, but hopefully this description helps. So this example is using the Wilderness Education Plan. So, it's just education, but the Wilderness Education Plan is a big part of it. So in step 1, remember these are incremental, so you have to start on step 1. Step 1 is wilderness education activities have been conducted in the fiscal year without a wilderness education plan in place. So let's say, you know what, you've been doing that for a bunch of years, that's been complete for a while, and the agency or you completed a wilderness education plan last year, so that's already done. Those points are already being reported. This year, what you're really excited to do is implement some of the activities identified as priorities in that plan. So that's what you're going to apply for funding to do. And when you complete that activity, you help the agency or you increase the WSP scoring by 2 points. But on the Forest Service side, the way that's working is they've already got wilderness education activities completed without an education plan, but now they've completed an education plan, so they've got 4 points. And once your project is done, what they're going to report is 6 points for wilderness stewardship performance. So you're reporting an increase of 2 points, but when they do their final reporting, they'll be reporting 6 points for wilderness stewardship performance in that year for that element. And then the other thing I think people have a big question about is gained versus maintained points. And I often get asked if we're scoring these differently in the rating of the applications. And I think my answer here is it depends. The maintenance is just as important as increasing the scores in most cases. So we really take those at a case-by-case basis. So if you're working on maintaining scores, I wouldn't let that dissuade you from applying. But I would encourage you to think about other ways that you can engage with the agency and engage with wilderness stewardship performance, maybe including some maintained points, but also some gained points. So gain versus maintained, kind of the same concept here. And we're still using education as the example. So again, those wilderness education activities were completed without a wilderness education plan in another year. The education plan was finished last year, so that's done. This year, let's say we're talking about, you're completing activities for the very first year after the plan has been implemented. In that case, you're gaining 2 points for this wilderness and wilderness stewardship performance under the education element. But let's say you want to apply again next year to do those same activities. The Forest Service is already at the 6-point level for education. But what you're doing year to year is helping them to maintain that 6-point level. So each consecutive year that you do these same activities, you're maintaining those 2 points, if that makes sense, because you're not redoing the wilderness education plan, and you're not really going all the way back to the beginning where you're completing activities without an education plan. So rather than saying, oh, we're maintaining 6 points, you're really maintaining 2 points, because if you stop doing these activities, the education plan would still be in place and the forest would still be able to report this 4-point level for wilderness stewardship performance. All right, that's all I had there. I will open it back up for more questions about that. I'm going to leave the PowerPoint open in case we need to go back to any of the slides. I hope that helped to bring some clarity to some of the scoring. And I'll monitor the chat and the hands raised here. It looks like Kim, you've got your hand up, so we'll just start with you.
Okay. So like say an education element, and you've been doing stuff on a forest for years with whatever, and then your capacity, that organization's capacity to maintain that stops. So we're not able to maintain that score. Does it mean that the score is going to go down for the Forest Service, or is it just going to stay that way until somebody picks it back up?
Well, if you haven't done the activities for a while, it probably did go down. You'll have to check with the Forest Service, and then if you pick those back up, then you'll be gaining those points again. That's a good question.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I never realized that. That's awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions floating around out there? All right. Well, again, thanks everybody. My contact information is here. If you've got, oh, we got another question. Hold on. Oh, whoops, it looks like I messed up. It says you had one slide that mentioned a December 5th deadline and the first was November 5th. Thanks, Joe. That was totally a typo on my end. It is December 5th. So sorry about that. Late night slide presentation creation. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Feel free to reach out if you've got more questions or you want to run some project ideas by me. I'm more than happy to help you out and help refine the projects. Or if you've got questions about DEIA components or pretty much anything, please reach out. And I'm really thankful you all joined today and hope to see some awesome applications this year. Thanks so much, and we will see you all on the trail.